Blood painted the horizon as Zara Sutton stared down the barrel of her father's Colt revolver, her hands steady despite the trembling in her heart. The year was 1875, and Sonora, Texas, was a town caught between the dying breaths of the frontier and the birth pangs of civilization. Behind her lay the body of Frank Wilkes, the man who just tried to claim what wasn't his to take. "You'll get blood everywhere," came a deep voice from the shadow of the livery stable. Zara didn't turn, keeping the gun trained on the spot where Frank had fallen, just in case. "Then it'll match the dirt you came from," she replied, her voice steady as the hand that held the gun. The stranger stepped forward, boots crunching on the hard, packed earth. He was tall, with shoulders broad enough to block out the setting sun. His face was shadowed beneath the brim of his hat, but she could make out the strong line of his jaw, dusted with several days' worth of beard. "Zachary Galloway," he introduced himself, not offering his hand. His eyes went to Frank, who moaned softly, "Not dead, then?" "Not yet," Zara confirmed, finally lowering the gun as Frank remained still save for the shallow rise and fall of his chest. "Sheriff Graham will want to deal with him anyway. He tried to take my land." Zachary's eyes narrowed. "Land dispute." Zara nodded, suddenly feeling the weight of the day pressing down on her shoulders. Her father had been buried for less than a week, and already the vultures were circling. Frank Wilkes had been the boldest, showing up at her homestead with papers he claimed proved her father had sold him the property before his death. "My father's land. My land now." She tucked the gun into the waistband of her skirt. "I need to find the sheriff." "Allow me," Zachary said, tipping his hat. "Best if a lady isn't seen dragging a bleeding man through the streets of Sonora." Zara studied him, searching for deceit in those storm-gray eyes. Finding none, she nodded once. "I'll be at the doctor's." "My brother was injured when this one and his friends paid us a visit." As she turned to leave, Zachary called after her. "Miss," she paused, looking back over her shoulder. "That was fine shooting. Where'd you learn to handle a gun like that?" A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "My father didn't have any sons until my brother came along. Someone had to help protect what's ours." The doctor's office smelled of carbolic acid and desperation. Zara sat beside her brother's bed, her fingers wrapped around his much smaller ones. At 16, Toby was still all knobby knees and elbows, his face boyish beneath a shock of sandy hair. The bandage around his head was stark against his pale skin. "Miss Sutton." Dr. Peterson entered the room, his spectacles perched on the end of his nose. "Your brother will be fine. The wound is superficial, as head wounds often are, lots of blood but no lasting damage." Zara felt herself sag with relief. "Thank you, doctor. He'll need rest. I suggest he stay here tonight and you can take him home in the morning. I'll stay with him." "As you wish." The doctor hesitated. "Miss Sutton, forgive my boldness, but it isn't proper for a young woman to be living alone on a ranch, especially now with your father gone and your brother laid up. Perhaps you might consider—" "I'm not selling the ranch, doctor." "Peterson," Zara interrupted, her voice firm but polite, "and I'm not leaving it unattended. I'll be returning tonight to tend to the animals, then I'll come back in the morning for Toby." The door opened before the doctor could respond, and Sheriff Graham stepped in, followed by Zachary Galloway. "Miss Sutton," the sheriff nodded, his weathered face grave. "Mr. Galloway here tells me you had some trouble with Frank Wilkes. He came to my property claiming my father had sold him our land. When I asked to see the deed, he and his men tried to force us out. Toby was injured in the struggle and she swallowed. "I shot Mr. Wilkes when he tried to take my gun." Sheriff Graham sighed heavily. "Frank Wilkes has been a thorn in my side for years, but he's got friends in high places, Miss Sutton, Judge Reynolds for one." "My father didn't sell our land," Zara insisted. "He would never." "Do you have the deed?" Zachary asked, speaking for the first time since entering the room. Zara nodded. "In the strong box at home. Father always kept it there, along with Mother's jewelry and his pocket watch." "I suggest we retrieve it," Sheriff Graham said. "And soon. Frank's already been taken to the judge's house to recover. His story might differ from yours, Miss Sutton." "I'll escort her," Zachary offered, catching Zara by surprise. "You don't have to," she began. "I insist," he cut her off. "No woman should ride alone at dusk, especially with Wilkes' men possibly still around." She wanted to argue that she could take care of herself, but the truth was, she was tired. The weight of the past week, her father's sudden death from a heart seizure, the funeral, and now this attack pressed down on her like a physical thing. "Very well," she conceded. "But we leave now. I need to tend to the animals before full dark." The ride to the Sutton Ranch was mostly silent. The setting sun cast long shadows across the rolling Texas landscape, painting everything in shades of gold and copper. Zara stole glances at her companion, trying to place him. She knew most folks in Sonora and the surrounding areas, but Zachary Galloway was unfamiliar. "You're not from around here," she finally said, breaking the silence. "No," he agreed, his eyes scanning the horizon, ever watchful. "Been drifting since the war ended, the war." It explained much about the man, the vigilance, the hard set of his shoulders, the way he sat his horse like it was an extension of himself. "What brings you to Sonora?" he shrugged. "Heard there might be work at the Hopkins Ranch. Thought I'd see if they needed an extra hand." "They usually hire in spring," Zara informed him. "But with winter coming on, they might need help with the fall roundup." He nodded, then asked, "Your ranch, is it big?" 200 acres, she said with pride. "Not the biggest, but the water rights make it valuable. We've got a year-round stream that never runs dry, even in the worst drought." "Valuable indeed," Zachary murmured. "No wonder Wilkes wants it." They crested a hill, and the Sutton Ranch came into view below. It wasn't grand, but it was well kept, a sturdy 2-story house, a large barn, corrals, and outbuildings. A handful of cattle grazed in the nearest pasture, and smoke curled from the chimney. Zara frowned. "I didn't leave a fire going." Zachary's hand went to his gun. "Stay behind me." They approached cautiously, but before they reached the yard, the front door opened and a woman stepped onto the porch. "Mrs. Abernathy," Zara said, relief evident in her voice. She urged her horse forward. "What are you doing here?" The older woman, gray-haired and sturdy as an oak, crossed her arms. "Did you think I'd let Jacob Sutton's place sit empty with his children in town? I've been keeping an eye on things, fed the chickens and milked the cow too." Her sharp eyes took in Zachary. "Who's this?" "Zachary Galloway, madam," he introduced himself, removing his hat. "I was helping Miss Sutton with a situation in town." "Frank Wilkes," Zara explained, dismounting. "He came with some men, claimed father sold him the ranch. Toby's at the doctor's with a head wound and I shot Wilkes." Mrs. Abernathy's eyebrows shot up, but she didn't look particularly surprised. "Always knew that man would push too far one day. Is Toby all right?" "He'll be fine. I need to get the deed from father's strongbox to show the sheriff." Zara handed her reins to Zachary and hurried inside, Mrs. Abernathy following. The interior of the Sutton home was modest but comfortable, with sturdy furniture and handmade quilts. A photograph of Zara's parents on their wedding day hung over the fireplace, alongside a smaller one of a much younger Jacob Sutton in his Texas Ranger uniform. Zara went directly to her father's study, a small room off the main living area. The strongbox was kept in the bottom drawer of his desk, locked away from prying eyes. She knelt, pulled out the drawer, and froze. The strongbox was gone. "It's not here," she said, panic rising in her throat. "Mrs. Abernathy, the strongbox is gone." The older woman hurried to her side, eyes wide. "Are you sure this is where your father kept it?" "Yes, it's always been here." Zachary appeared in the doorway, his expression grim. "When were you last home?" "This morning. I left after breakfast to go into town for supplies, then was going to visit father's grave. That's when I ran into Wilkes in town. He followed me back here." "Did Wilkes or his men ever get inside the house?" Zara thought back to the confrontation. "Yes. While I was struggling with Wilkes, 2 of his men went inside. I assumed they were looking for valuables. Or the deed," Zachary said grimly. Zara felt her world tilting. Without the deed, her claim to the ranch was substantially weakened, especially against someone like Frank Wilkes with the judge in his pocket. "We need to search the house," Mrs. Abernathy declared. "Maybe they just moved it." But a thorough search turned up nothing. The strongbox, containing not only the deed but also the few precious mementos of her mother, was gone. "I'll have to tell the sheriff," Zara said, sinking into her father's chair. "But without the deed—" "It's not just your word against Wilkes," Zachary reminded her. "The deed will be registered at the county office in San Antonio. We can send a telegram requesting a copy." Hope flickered to life in Zara's chest. "You're right. Father always said to keep records of important papers. It'll take time, though," Mrs. Abernathy cautioned. "Meanwhile, you shouldn't stay here alone." "I'm not leaving my home," Zara said firmly, "and Toby will be back tomorrow." "A 16-year-old boy with a head wound isn't much protection," the older woman clucked. "I'll stay," Zachary offered, surprising both women. "I can bed down in the barn." "Keep an eye on things until your brother's fit." Zara opened her mouth to refuse, then thought better of it. Pride wouldn't keep her alive if Wilkes or his men returned. "That's very kind, Mr. Galloway, but I can't pay you much. Room and board is enough for now," he said. "And I'd appreciate the chance to look at that stream you mentioned. Been thinking about buying land myself someday." It was settled then. Mrs. Abernathy helped Zara prepare a simple supper of cornbread and bean soup, which they shared at the kitchen table. The older woman offered to stay the night as well, but her husband was expecting her home. "I'll be fine with Mr. Galloway on the property," Zara assured her, "and I'll fetch Toby first thing in the morning, after Mrs. Abernathy left. Zara showed Zachary to the barn, where a small room at the back served as occasional quarters for ranch hands during busy seasons. It held a narrow cot, a chair, and not much else. "It's not much," she apologized. "It's dry and secure," he replied, setting his saddlebags on the cot. "I've slept in far worse places." She lingered in the doorway, suddenly aware of the impropriety of having an unmarried man staying on her property without a chaperone. "But what choice did she have, Mr. Galloway?" she began. "I want to thank you for your help today. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't been there." He looked up from unpacking his few belongings, his eyes meeting hers. "You'd have managed, Miss Sutton. You strike me as a woman who knows how to take care of herself. Still, it's nice not to have to." She smiled briefly. "Good night, Mr. Galloway." "Good night, Miss Sutton. Lock your doors." She did as he suggested, checking every window and door in the house before retiring to her bedroom. Despite her exhaustion, sleep was elusive. Every creak of the house settling, every whisper of wind outside her window had her reaching for the revolver she'd placed on her bedside table. Around midnight, she heard the distinct sound of a horse approaching. Heart-pounding, she grabbed the gun and crept to the window, parting the curtains just enough to peer outside. In the moonlight, she could make out Zachary walking the perimeter of the house, rifle in hand. The sound she'd heard must have been his horse shifting in the barn. Relief washed over her. Knowing he was out there, vigilant, finally allowed her to sink into a dreamless sleep. The first light of dawn found Zara already awake and dressed. She made coffee and a batch of biscuits, setting aside some for Zachary before heading out to collect eggs and milk the cow. By the time she finished her chores, he had emerged from the barn, looking rested despite his night watch. "Morning," he greeted her, tipping his hat. "You're up early." "Ranch work doesn't wait," she replied, offering him a cup of coffee. "There's biscuits in the kitchen if you're hungry." "I need to head into town soon to fetch Toby." "I'll come with you," he said, accepting the coffee gratefully. "We should talk to the sheriff about the stolen deed as well." They ate breakfast quickly, then saddled their horses and rode toward town. The morning was clear and cool, promising a beautiful autumn day. Under different circumstances, Zara might have enjoyed the ride and the company. Zachary Galloway was an easy man to be silent with, and when he did speak, his words were thoughtful. "Tell me about your father," he said as they rode side by side. Zara smiled, memories warming her heart despite her grief. "He was a Texas Ranger before he married my mother. Strong, principled. After she died, he raised me alone until he remarried and Toby came along. My stepmother passed when Toby was just 8. She glanced at Zachary. "What about your family?" "Lost my parents to fever when I was young, raised by my grandfather in Kentucky until I was old enough to enlist, after the war." He trailed off, a shadow passing over his features. "There wasn't much left to go home to." "I'm sorry," Zara said softly. He shrugged. "War changes everything. You learn to start fresh." They reached town just as the businesses were opening for the day. Sonora was small but growing, with a main street that boasted a general store, a bank, a saloon, and various other establishments necessary for frontier life. They tied their horses outside the doctor's office and went inside. Toby was awake, sitting up in bed and looking considerably better than the day before. His face lit up when he saw his sister. "Zara, the doctor says I can go home." "That's good news," she smiled, ruffling his hair gently, careful of his bandage. "How's your head?" "Hurts some, but not bad." His eyes moved to Zachary, curious. "Who's this?" "Zachary Galloway," the man introduced himself, extending a hand which Toby shook. "I helped your sister yesterday after you were injured." While Toby dressed, Zara filled him in on what had happened with Frank Wilkes and the missing deed. The boy's face darkened with anger. "Those thieves. I bet Judge Reynolds is in on it too. Everyone knows he and Wilkes are thick as thieves." "We need proof before making accusations," Zara cautioned. "For now, we're going to see the sheriff, then send a telegram to San Antonio for a copy of the deed." With Toby ready, they paid Dr. Peterson and headed for the sheriff's office. Sheriff Graham was at his desk, looking tired and careworn. He listened as Zara explained about the missing strongbox. "Thievery on top of assault," he sighed. "I'm not surprised, to be honest. Wilkes has been getting bolder lately." He leaned back in his chair. "Problem is, Judge Reynolds released him this morning, said it was self-defense on Frank's part that you drew on him first, Miss Sutton." "That's a lie," Toby exclaimed. "He came to our property with armed men demanding we leave." "I believe you," Sheriff Graham said, raising a placating hand. "But without that deed and with the judge backing Wilkes' story." He trailed off. "What about witnesses?" Zachary asked. "Surely someone in town saw Wilkes and his men following Miss Sutton yesterday." "Maybe," the sheriff conceded. "I'll ask around. Meanwhile, I suggest you get that telegram sent to San Antonio right away." He looked at Zara sympathetically. "And be careful out at the ranch. Wilkes isn't the type to give up easily." They left the sheriff's office and headed to the telegraph office, where Zara sent a message to the county clerk in San Antonio requesting an urgent copy of the deed to the Sutton property. "How long will it take to get a response?" Toby asked as they stepped back onto the boardwalk. "Depends on how busy they are," Zachary answered. "Could be a day, could be a week." "We don't have a week," Zara said grimly. "We need to find that strongbox. It has to be somewhere in Sonora." "Wilkes probably has it," Toby suggested. "Or Judge Reynolds," Zachary added. "Either way, it won't be easy to find." They were discussing their options when a commotion further down the street caught their attention. A group of men had gathered outside the saloon, and at their center stood Frank Wilkes, his shoulder bandaged but otherwise looking remarkably well for a man who'd been shot the day before. "There she is," Wilkes called out, pointing at Zara. "The woman who tried to kill me over land that rightfully belongs to me." Zara stiffened, her hand instinctively moving toward her gun. Zachary caught her wrist, his grip firm but gentle. "Not here," he murmured. "Not now." Wilkes strutted toward them, 5 men at his back. He was a thick-set man in his 40s, with small, mean eyes and a florid complexion that spoke of too much whiskey. "Miss Sutton," he sneered, "enjoying your last day on my property." "It's not yours, Wilkes," Zara said evenly. "Never was, never will be. That's not what my deed says." He patted his vest pocket. "Signed by your father himself." "A forgery," Toby spat. "Our father would never sell to the likes of you." Wilkes' eyes narrowed. "Watch your mouth, boy. You already got one lesson in respect. Do you need another?" Zachary stepped forward, positioning himself between the Suttons and Wilkes. "I suggest you move along, Mr. Wilkes. The lady and her brother have business to attend to." Wilkes looked Zachary up and down, assessing him. "And who might you be?" "Zachary Galloway." "Well, Mr. Galloway, this isn't your fight. I suggest you find other employment than playing protector to a woman who won't have a pot to piss in by week's end." "I choose my own fights," Zachary replied calmly. "And right now, I'm choosing to stand with the Suttons." The tension between the men was palpable. Around them, townsfolk had stopped to watch the confrontation, their expressions a mix of concern and morbid curiosity. Wilkes finally broke the staring contest, his lips curling into a smirk. "Suit yourself. But know this, I'll be taking possession of the Sutton Ranch by the end of the week. Judge Reynolds has assured me of it." He tipped his hat mockingly. "Miss Sutton, always a pleasure." As he and his men turned to leave, Zara called after him, "Where's my strongbox, Wilkes?" He paused, glancing back over his shoulder. "I'm sure I don't know what you're talking about." "You're a liar and a thief," she said, her voice carrying down the street, "and everyone in Sonora knows it." For a moment, rage flashed across Wilkes' face, but he quickly masked it with a cold smile. "Careful, Miss Sutton, slander is a serious accusation." With that, he continued on his way, his men following like obedient dogs. When they were out of earshot, Toby turned to his sister. "We need to find that strongbox." "And we will," she assured him, "but first we need supplies. I don't want to have to come back to town for a while if we can help it." They spent the next hour at the general store, stocking up on flour, coffee, sugar, and other necessities. Zachary insisted on paying for ammunition for their rifles and handguns, brushing aside Zara's protests. "Consider it an investment in my own safety," he said. "Can't very well protect the ranch without proper ammunition." As they were loading their supplies onto their horses, Mrs. Abernathy hurried toward them, her face flushed with exertion. "Zara, thank goodness I found you. I've just heard from Martha Jenkins that her husband saw Wilkes and Judge Reynolds meeting late last night at the judge's house. They had a box with them, could have been your father's strongbox." Hope surged in Zara's chest. "Did Mr. Jenkins see what they did with it, Mrs.?" Abernathy shook her head. "No, but if they're trying to forge documents or destroy the real deed, they'd need time and privacy." Zachary frowned. "The judge's house is too obvious, they'd take it somewhere else." "Wilkes has a hunting cabin," Toby offered, "up in the hills north of town. He takes his lady friends there sometimes." He blushed at the implication. "Do you know where it is?" Zachary asked. Toby nodded. "I can find it. I've hunted in those hills plenty of times." Zara considered their options. Riding into the hills to confront Wilkes at his cabin was dangerous, potentially foolhardy. But if the strongbox was there, with the original deed and her mother's few precious belongings, "We need more information before we go charging up there," she decided. "Let's head back to the ranch for now. We can ask around, find out if anyone's seen Wilkes heading up to his cabin recently." They said goodbye to Mrs. Abernathy, who promised to keep her ears open for any useful information. As they rode out of town, Zara couldn't shake the feeling that Wilkes was watching them from somewhere, plotting his next move. The rest of the day passed quietly at the Sutton ranch. Toby, despite his injury, insisted on helping with chores, though Zara made him promise to rest if his head started hurting. Zachary proved himself useful, repairing a broken corral fence and helping to bring in the small herd of cattle from the far pasture. As the sun began to set, they gathered in the kitchen for supper. Zara had prepared a stew with vegetables from her garden and the last of the salt pork. The warm, savory meal was a comfort after the tense events of the day. "We should take watches tonight," Zachary suggested as they ate. "Wilkes might try something while it's dark." Toby straightened, eager to prove himself. "I'll take a shift." Zara hesitated, concerned about his injury, but the determined set of her brother's jaw reminded her so much of their father that she relented. "All right, but second watch. You need rest to heal properly." After supper, Zachary took the first watch while Zara and Toby prepared for bed. She showed her brother how to load and check the shotgun, though he'd been handling firearms since he was 12. "Zara," Toby said as she was about to leave his room, "do you think we'll lose the ranch?" The vulnerability in his voice made her heart ache. This was his home, the only one he'd ever known. "No," she said firmly. "I won't let that happen. We're Suttons, and Suttons don't give up without a fight." He nodded, seeming reassured. "I like Mr. Galloway," he said, changing the subject. "He reminds me of father." The comparison startled Zara. She hadn't thought of it that way, but there was something about Zachary's quiet strength and sense of duty that did recall Jacob Sutton. "He's been a great help," she agreed neutrally. "Is he staying on, after all this is sorted out, I mean?" "I don't know, Toby, that's up to him." She kissed his forehead, careful of his bandage. "Get some sleep. I'll wake you for your watch." In her own room, Zara changed into her nightgown but didn't get into bed. Instead, she sat by the window with her revolver, watching the dark yard. The moon was bright enough to cast shadows, and in one of them, she could make out Zachary's figure as he patrolled around the house. She thought about what Toby had said. Was Zachary Galloway planning to stay in Sonora? He'd mentioned wanting land of his own someday, but drifters often spoke of settling down without ever doing so. And why did the question make her feel so unsettled? It was foolish to develop any sort of attachment to the man. He'd been kind, yes, and had risked himself to help them, but that didn't mean anything beyond basic decency. And even if it did, she had the ranch to think about and Toby's future. Romance was a luxury she couldn't afford. Still, as she watched him move through the yard, rifle in hand, she couldn't deny the flutter in her chest. It had been a long time since she'd allowed herself to see a man as anything other than a potential threat to her independence or her property. Zachary Galloway, with his storm-gray eyes and quiet strength, was making that increasingly difficult. Around midnight, she went downstairs to relieve him for his rest. She found him sitting on the porch steps, alert despite the late hour. "My turn," she said softly, stepping outside. He looked up, his face shadowed in the moonlight. "All quiet so far. Good, you should get some sleep." He stood but made no move to leave. "You should be resting too, tomorrow might bring more trouble." "I'm fine," she assured him. "I don't need much sleep." He studied her face for a moment, then nodded. "Wake me if you hear anything suspicious, anything at all." "I will." Still he lingered, as if there was something more he wanted to say. Finally, he just touched the brim of his hat and headed toward the barn, his footsteps silent on the packed earth. Zara took his place on the porch steps, rifle across her lap. The night was cool, with just enough breeze to stir the leaves of the oak tree in the front yard. Crickets chirped, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its pack. She loved this land, loved it with a fierceness that sometimes frightened her. It wasn't just dirt and water rights, it was her heritage, her future, her responsibility to Toby. She would die before she let Frank Wilkes take it from them. The night passed without incident, and when she woke Toby for his watch, she was almost disappointed. Part of her had hoped Wilkes would make his move, bring matters to a head so they could be resolved one way or another. She slept fitfully for a few hours, then rose at dawn to begin the day's chores. She was collecting eggs in the henhouse when she heard a horse approaching at a gallop. Grabbing her revolver from its holster hanging by the door, she hurried outside. It was Mrs. Abernathy's son, Robert, riding hard toward the house. Zachary emerged from the barn at the sound, and Toby came out onto the porch, shotgun in hand. "Zara," Robert called, reining his horse to a stop. "Ma sent me." Judge Reynolds filed papers this morning. He's declared the Sutton property forfeit for unpaid taxes. Says it's to be auctioned off tomorrow morning. "What?" Zara gasped. "That's impossible. Father always paid the taxes on time. I have the receipts." "Judge says there's 3 years' worth unpaid," Robert reported grimly. $500 due. $500 might as well have been $5,000. It was an impossible sum to raise in less than a day. "It's a trick," Toby spat. "Another way to steal our land when the forged deed didn't work." Zachary stepped forward. "Are the receipts in the strongbox too?" Zara nodded, her mind racing. "Yes, Father kept everything important in there." "Then we need to find it," Zachary said decisively. "Today." Toby turned to Robert. "Did your ma find out anything about Wilkes' cabin?" The young man nodded. "That's the other thing she sent me to tell you. Wilkes was seen heading up there last night with a couple of his men, and they were carrying something that could have been a box." Zachary and Zara exchanged a look. This was the confirmation they needed. "We need to go now," Zara decided. "If we can find the strongbox with the receipts, we can prove the judge is lying. And if the receipts are gone," Zachary asked quietly, "then we find another way," she said firmly. "But I'm not giving up my home without a fight." They moved quickly, gathering supplies for the ride into the hills. Robert offered to stay behind to watch the ranch, which Zara gratefully accepted. Within half an hour, she, Toby, and Zachary were mounted and ready to go. The hills north of Sonora were rugged and sparsely wooded, cut through with ravines and dotted with rocky outcroppings. Toby led the way, his knowledge of the terrain proving invaluable as they followed game trails and cattle paths toward Wilkes' cabin. "It's just over this ridge," Toby said in a low voice as they paused to rest the horses around midday. "In a little valley by a spring, good spot, hidden from the main trails." "How many men do you think he has with him?" Zachary asked, checking his revolver. 2 or 3, based on what Robert said, Zara replied, plus Wilkes himself. "We should approach from different directions," Zachary suggested. Toby, you know the lay of the land. Is there a back way to the cabin? Toby thought for a moment, then nodded. There's a ravine that runs behind it. Deep enough to approach unseen if you're careful. They formulated a plan. Zachary would approach from the front, making enough noise to draw attention while Zara and Toby came in from behind through the ravine. If the strongbox was there, they'd grab it and ride hard for town. If not, they'd retreat and come up with a new plan. This is dangerous, Zachary warned as they prepared to split up. If anything goes wrong, get out and head back to town. The sheriff may not be much help, but he's better than nothing. Zara caught his arm as he turned to go. Be careful. Wilkes won't hesitate to shoot. Something warm flickered in his eyes. Neither will I if it comes to it. He covered her hand with his own for a brief moment. Stay safe. They separated, Zachary heading around to approach the cabin from the main trail, while Zara and Toby led their horses carefully into the ravine Toby had mentioned. It was deeper than Zara had expected, with steep sides that offered good cover but made movement difficult. How far? She whispered to Toby as they picked their way along the rocky bottom. Not far. The cabin should be just above us to the right in about 100 yards. They continued in silence, alert for any sound that might indicate they'd been spotted. When they reached the point Toby had indicated, they tied their horses to a scrubby tree and began to climb the ravine wall, using small trees and rocks as handholds. At the top, they crouched low and surveyed the scene. The cabin was about 50 yards away, a simple one-room structure with a small porch. A lean-to on the side served as a stable for 3 horses. Smoke curled from the chimney, and through the single window, Zara could make out movement inside. 3 horses, she murmured, so Wilkes and 2 others. Toby pointed to a 4th horse, tethered to a tree a little distance from the others. That's Zachary's bay. He's already here. Concern twisted in Zara's gut. The plan had been for Zachary to make a noisy approach to draw attention, but there was no sign of commotion. Had he been captured? Or was he waiting for them to get into position? We need to get closer, she decided. See what's happening inside before we make a move. They crept forward, using trees and brush for cover until they were at the back of the cabin. Voices drifted through the walls, too muffled to make out clearly. Zara wished there was a back window, but the cabin presented only solid logs on this side. We need to get to the window on the side, Toby whispered. Zara nodded, and they began to edge around the corner of the cabin. Just as they reached the side, the cabin door banged open, and a man stumbled out onto the porch, clutching his jaw. You didn't have to hit me, the man complained loudly. You didn't have to question my orders, came Wilkes' voice from inside. Now get back to town and tell the judge we've got the situation under control. The man spat blood onto the porch, then stomped down the steps toward his horse. As he mounted and rode away, Zara and Toby pressed themselves against the cabin wall, hearts pounding. Once the sound of hooves had faded, they carefully peered around to the front of the cabin. Through the open door, they could see part of the interior. Wilkes was seated at a rough table, papers spread before him. And there, on the floor beside him, was Jacob Sutton's strongbox, its lock broken open. Zara's heart leapt at the sight. So close, yet still out of reach. She strained to see if Zachary was inside, but her angle was too limited. Just then, Wilkes spoke again. I still say we should just burn the whole lot, receipts, deed, all of it. And I still say that's too risky, replied another voice, one Zara recognized as belonging to Wilkes' foreman, a man named Hayes. Judge wants this done legal-like. Legal, Wilkes scoffed. Nothing legal about forging tax records. Legal enough if no one can prove otherwise, Hayes countered. And with their receipts gone, they can't. Zara felt a surge of anger. So the judge was indeed in on the scheme, falsifying records to claim the Suttons hadn't paid their taxes. With the real receipts in her possession, she could prove the fraud. She was trying to decide on their next move when a twig snapped behind them. Before she could react, a hand clamped over her mouth and an arm wrapped around her waist, dragging her backward. From the corner of her eye, she saw Toby receiving the same treatment from another man. Her captor dragged her around to the front of the cabin, Toby's assailant following. Boss, the man called. Look what we found sneaking around back. Wilkes and Hayes appeared in the doorway, Wilkes' face breaking into a triumphant smile when he saw them. Well, Miss Sutton and her little brother, come to pay a social call. Let us go, Zara demanded when the hand left her mouth, though the arm around her waist remained firm. You're trespassing on Sutton property and you've stolen our belongings, Wilkes laughed. Trespassing? This is my hunting cabin on land I own, and as for stealing, he gestured to the strongbox. Just retrieving some papers concerning property I legally purchased from your father. You're a liar, Toby spat, struggling against his captor. Our father never sold to you. That's not what the deed says, Wilkes replied smugly. And unfortunately for you, the tax receipts seem to have gone missing. Judge Reynolds will have no choice but to auction the property. Where's Zachary? Zara asked, suddenly realizing he was nowhere to be seen. A flash of confusion crossed Wilkes' face. Who? Before anyone could answer, a shot rang out from the trees, striking the porch post inches from Wilkes' head. The man holding Zara loosened his grip in surprise, and she took the opportunity to drive her elbow hard into his stomach. As he doubled over, she wrenched free and drew her revolver. Toby, taking his cue from his sister, stomped hard on his captor's foot and twisted away, though he hadn't managed to bring a weapon. Get in the cabin, Wilkes shouted, diving inside as another shot kicked up dirt at his feet. Hayes and the two other men scrambled after him, leaving Zara and Toby momentarily free but exposed in the open yard. Zara grabbed her brother's arm and pulled him toward the cover of the trees just as Zachary appeared from the woods, rifle in hand. Go for the horses, he ordered. I'll cover you. Zara hesitated. The strongbox is not worth your lives, he cut her off. Go, a shot from the cabin window emphasized his point, splintering bark from the tree beside them. Zara reluctantly turned toward the ravine, pulling Toby with her. They had only taken a few steps when Wilkes appeared in the doorway, aiming directly at them. Stop or I'll shoot the boy first, he shouted. Zachary stepped in front of Toby, his own gun trained on Wilkes. You'll be dead before you pull the trigger. Maybe, Wilkes acknowledged. But he'll still be dead. Put down your weapons, all of you. There was a tense moment of standoff, then Zachary slowly lowered his rifle. Zara, seeing no alternative, reluctantly placed her revolver on the ground. Inside, Wilkes directed. Now. They were marched into the cabin, where Hayes and the other two men kept them covered while Wilkes paced angrily. You just had to make this difficult, he snarled at Zara. I offered to buy the ranch fair and square when your father was alive, and he refused. Now I have to resort to this. He gestured to the papers on the table, forged documents, and the real deed side by side. You're not going to get away with this, Zara said, her voice steadier than she felt. People know we came up here looking for you. Do they? Wilkes smiled unpleasantly. And when they find 3 bodies in a ravine, victims of a tragic accident, what then? Zachary took a step forward, only to have Hayes jab a gun in his ribs. Murder 3 people over a land dispute. That's a hanging offense, Wilkes. Who said anything about murder? Wilkes replied innocently. Accidents happen in these hills all the time. Young woman, inexperienced boy, and a drifter no one will miss. Tragic, really. Zara's mind raced. They needed a distraction, a way out. Her eyes fell on the strongbox, still open on the floor. Inside, she could see the glint of her mother's jewelry and the edge of what might be the tax receipts. Why are you really doing this, Wilkes? She asked, trying to buy time. The ranch isn't that valuable, not worth murder. Shows what you know, Wilkes snorted. That year-round stream of yours. Perfect place for a dam. The railroad's coming through north of Sonora next year and they'll need water, lots of it. Your 200 acres will be worth 20 times what they are now. The railroad, Toby exclaimed. Is that what this is about, business boy, always business? Wilkes checked his pocket watch. Now, we need to conclude our business here. Hayes, get some rope. We'll take them down to the ravine one at a time. As Hayes moved to a chest in the corner, Zara caught Zachary's eye. He gave an almost imperceptible nod toward the lantern hanging on the wall, the only source of light in the dim cabin, besides the small fire in the hearth. Understanding flashed between them. When Hayes turned back with a coil of rope, Zara suddenly clutched her stomach and doubled over, groaning in apparent pain. What's wrong with her? Wilkes demanded. Female troubles, Zachary said dismissively, moving as if to help her. As all eyes turned to Zara, Zachary lunged for the lantern, yanking it from its hook and hurling it toward Hayes and the man next to him. The lantern shattered, spilling kerosene that immediately caught fire from the exposed flame. Hayes and the other man yelled in alarm, beating at their oil-splashed clothes. Zachary tackled Wilkes before he could raise his gun, while Toby darted for the strongbox, snatching it up before diving through the open door. Zara, recovering from her feigned illness, grabbed her father's deed from the table and followed her brother out. Behind her, she heard the sounds of struggle as Zachary and Wilkes fought. The fire was spreading quickly, catching on the papers on the table and the dry wooden floor. Smoke began to fill the small cabin. "Zachary," she called from the doorway. "Come on!" He delivered one final blow to Wilkes, knocking him back into Hayes, then sprinted for the door. They ran for the ravine, Zara clutching the deed, Toby hugging the strongbox to his chest. Behind them, shouts and curses indicated that Wilkes and his men were in pursuit. They reached their horses and mounted quickly, not bothering with the careful descent they'd used earlier. Instead, they urged their mounts down the steep slope, sending rocks and dirt cascading as they half slid to the bottom. Once on level ground, they spurred the horses into a gallop, racing along the ravine toward town. The sound of pursuit faded behind them, likely because Wilkes and his men had to deal with the fire before it spread to the surrounding forest. Still, they didn't slow their pace until they were well clear of the hills and back on the main trail to Sonora. Only then did Zara pull her horse to a stop, breathing hard from the exertion and excitement. Toby reined in beside her, his face flushed but triumphant, the strongbox still clutched tightly under his arm. "We did it," he crowed. "We got it back." Zachary brought his horse alongside Zara's, his expression grim despite their successful escape. "Wilkes won't give up easily. He'll be coming after us, and if what he said about the railroad is true, he has powerful backers." "Then we go straight to the sheriff," Zara decided. "Show him the real receipts and the deed. With proof of fraud in hand, even Judge Reynolds will have a hard time supporting Wilkes." Zachary nodded slowly. "It might work, but be prepared for a fight. Men like Wilkes don't lose gracefully." They rode into Sonora just as the afternoon was fading into evening. The town seemed unusually quiet, with few people on the streets. Those who were out watched their arrival with interest, particularly the strongbox Toby carried. At the sheriff's office, they found not only Sheriff Graham but also, to their surprise, Judge Reynolds himself. The judge was a tall, thin man with a perpetually sour expression, made worse by the scene before him. Robert Abernathy, sporting a split lip, giving a statement about being attacked at the Sutton ranch. "Miss Sutton," the judge said coldly as they entered. "We were just discussing the unfortunate incident at your property." "What incident?" Zara demanded, looking to Robert. "Some men came looking for you," Robert explained, wincing as he touched his injured mouth. "Said they had business with you about the ranch. When I told them you weren't there, they got rough." Anger flashed through Zara. "Wilkes' men," she said to the sheriff. "The same ones who stole this." She gestured to the strongbox Toby was setting on the sheriff's desk. Sheriff Graham raised his eyebrows. "Your father's strongbox, where was it?" "At Wilkes' hunting cabin," Zachary answered. "Along with Wilkes himself, who admitted to forging documents and falsifying tax records to steal the Sutton ranch." Judge Reynolds' face darkened. "Those are serious allegations, sir. Do you have proof?" "Right here," Zara said firmly, opening the strongbox. Inside, nestled among her mother's modest jewelry, were several folded papers. She withdrew them carefully and spread them on the desk. 3 years' worth of tax receipts, each stamped and signed by the county tax assessor. "These prove the taxes were paid in full," she said, looking directly at the judge. "And yet you filed papers claiming they weren't." The judge's expression remained impassive, but a muscle twitched in his jaw. "There seems to be some confusion. The county records show no payment." "Because you and Wilkes altered them," Toby accused. "We heard him say it at the cabin." "The word of a boy and a woman with a vested interest," the judge dismissed. "Hardly compelling evidence." Zachary stepped forward, his voice quiet but firm. "What about the word of a former Texas Ranger?" He reached into his coat and withdrew a folded paper, which he placed beside the tax receipts. Zachary Galloway, Texas Rangers, discharged honorably in '69. I've been investigating land fraud across 3 counties for the governor's office. Frank Wilkes has been on our list of suspects for some time. Zara stared at him in shock. This was the first she'd heard of any such investigation. Had his appearance in Sonora been coincidence, or had he been watching them all along? The judge's composure cracked slightly. I was unaware of any investigation. That's generally the idea, Zachary replied dryly. Now, these tax receipts match copies in the San Antonio office copies I've already verified. Care to explain the discrepancy, Your Honor? For a moment, Judge Reynolds looked like he might continue to bluff, but then his shoulders sagged. Wilkes approached me 6 months ago, said there was money to be made when the railroad came through. All I had to do was help with some paperwork. Sheriff Graham shook his head in disgust. Judge, I'm going to have to ask for your gun and badge. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud. The judge didn't resist as the sheriff took his revolver and led him to a cell in the back. When Graham returned, he looked at the 3 of them with new respect. Miss Sutton, I believe your property is secure. I'll send a telegram to the circuit judge explaining the situation. He turned to Zachary. Mr. Galloway, I assume you'll want to be present when we arrest Wilkes. Zachary nodded. He'll likely return to town once he deals with the fire at his cabin. Fire? The sheriff questioned. Another unfortunate incident, Zachary said with a straight face. Lantern fell during an altercation. Cabin might be a total loss. Sheriff Graham suppressed a smile. I see. Well, I'll organize a posse. In the meantime, Miss Sutton, you and your brother should probably stay in town tonight. Wilkes might head to your ranch first. Zara agreed reluctantly. She hated the thought of leaving the ranch unattended, but safety had to come first. Mrs. Abernathy offered them rooms at her boarding house, which they gratefully accepted. As they walked from the sheriff's office to the boarding house, the strongbox now safely in Toby's possession again, Zara pulled Zachary aside. A Texas Ranger, she said quietly. Were you ever going to mention that? He looked uncomfortable for the first time since she'd met him. Former Ranger, and I wasn't sure who I could trust when I first came to Sonora. Land fraud cases often involve local officials. So your interest in our ranch was that part of your investigation? Initially, he admitted. Your father's name came up in connection with Wilkes, but not as a conspirator, he added quickly. As someone who might have information. When I learned he had passed, I thought his land might be Wilkes' next target. Zara processed this information, unsure how to feel. On one hand, Zachary had helped them save their ranch. On the other, he'd been less than forthcoming about his reasons for doing so. And now, she asked. What happens after Wilkes is arrested? Zachary hesitated. I report back to San Antonio. The governor will want to know about the judge's involvement. And then you move on to the next case, Zara concluded, trying to keep disappointment from her voice. Of course he would leave. Men like Zachary Galloway didn't settle down, especially not with a woman who came with a ranch and a teenage brother as responsibilities. He didn't confirm or deny, just studied her face with those storm-gray eyes. Let's get through tonight first. Wilkes is still out there and he's desperate now. They reached the boarding house, where Mrs. Abernathy had prepared rooms for them, one for Toby, and separate rooms for Zara and Zachary, though the knowing look in the older woman's eyes suggested she had her own ideas about their relationship. After a simple but satisfying supper, Toby retired early, exhausted from the day's events. Zara found herself on the small porch at the back of the boarding house, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Despite the danger still posed by Wilkes, a sense of peace settled over her. They had the deed, they had the receipts, and they had exposed the judge's corruption. The ranch would remain in Sutton hands. Footsteps behind her announced Zachary's arrival. He came to stand beside her at the porch railing, not speaking for several minutes. Your brother's asleep. He finally asked. Zara nodded. Out like a light as soon as his head hit the pillow. He's a good kid, brave. Yes, he is, pride warmed her voice. He's going to be a fine man like our father. And you're a remarkable woman, Zara Sutton. Zachary turned to face her, his expression earnest in the soft light spilling from the windows. Not many would fight so hard for their home. It's all I have, she said simply. The ranch, Toby, they're my family, my responsibility. Not all you have, he corrected gently. You have courage, intelligence, and a spirit that won't be broken. Those are rare qualities. His words touched something deep inside her, a place that had been lonely since her father's death. Thank you, she murmured, for saying that, for helping us, whatever your reasons. He took a step closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. My reasons changed, he admitted. Somewhere between watching you stand your ground against Wilkes in the street and seeing you ready to risk everything for your home. This isn't just an investigation for me anymore. Her heart beat a rapid tattoo against her ribs. What is it then? Instead of answering with words, Zachary reached up to touch her cheek, his fingers calloused but gentle. When she didn't pull away, he leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to retreat. But retreat was the last thing on Zara's mind as his lips found hers in a kiss that was both tender and questioning. She answered by curling her fingers into the front of his shirt, drawing him closer as the kiss deepened. It was a revelation, this feeling like coming home to a place she'd never known existed, but had been seeking all along. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Zachary rested his forehead against hers. I should probably tell you, he murmured, that I was planning to look at land around Sonora anyway. The Rangers gave me a taste for Texas, and I never found anywhere that felt right after the war. Until now, hope blossomed in Zara's chest. Are you saying you want to stay? If there's a reason to, he said, his eyes searching hers. Before she could respond, a shout from the street shattered the moment. Fire, fire at the livery stable. They rushed to the front of the boarding house, where a crowd was already gathering. Orange flames licked the night sky as the livery stable, one of the largest wooden structures in Sonora, burned fiercely. Men were forming a bucket brigade from the town well, but it was clearly a losing battle. This is Wilkes, Zachary said grimly. A distraction. Realization struck Zara like a physical blow. Toby, the strongbox. They ran back inside, taking the stairs 2 at a time. Zara burst into Toby's room to find it empty, the window open, and the strongbox gone. Toby. She called, panic rising in her throat. Toby, where are you? A groan from behind the bed drew their attention. Toby lay on the floor, a bloody gash on his temple. Zachary helped the boy to a sitting position while Zara examined the wound. What happened? She asked, relief making her voice shake. Woke up. Someone in the room, Toby mumbled, wincing. Tried to stop them. Took the strongbox. Wilkes, Zachary confirmed, creating chaos so he could steal back the evidence. We have to get it back, Zara insisted, helping Toby to his feet. Without those receipts, the deed is what matters most, Zachary cut in. Do you still have it? Zara's hand went to her bodice where she'd tucked the precious document for safekeeping. Yes, it's here. Good. That proves ownership at least. He turned to Toby. Can you walk? The boy nodded, though he swayed slightly. I'm fine, just a knock on the head. Stay with your sister, Zachary instructed. I'm going after Wilkes. Not alone, Zara protested. He's dangerous. So am I, Zachary replied, his expression hardening, and he's not expecting me. He'll think we're all distracted by the fire. He cupped her face in his hands. Trust me, Zara, I'll come back. The intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. I'm holding you to that, Zachary Galloway. With a brief nod, he was gone, slipping out the window the way Wilkes or his men had entered. Zara helped Toby to the washstand where she cleaned his wound as best she could. He'll be all right, Toby said, watching her worried expression. He's good at what he does. How do you know that? Toby gave her a look that was surprisingly adult for his 16 years. Because he looks at you the way father used to look at mother, like you're the reason the sun rises. Zara felt her cheeks warm. Don't be ridiculous. I'm not, Toby insisted. And you look at him the same way when you think no one's watching. Before she could formulate a response to that astute observation, Mrs. Abernathy burst into the room, her face flushed from exertion. Thank goodness you're all right. The sheriff's looking for you. They've spotted Wilkes at the edge of town, heading toward your ranch. Zara's heart sank. Of course Wilkes would go there to destroy whatever evidence remained, perhaps to burn the ranch house as he had the livery stable. Zachary went after him, she told Mrs. Abernathy. We need to tell the sheriff. But when they reached the street, the fire had spread to the adjacent feed store and Sheriff Graham was fully occupied organizing the townspeople to contain it. There was no hope of assembling a posse now. We have to go ourselves, Zara decided. Zachary might need help. You can't, Mrs. Abernathy protested. It's too dangerous, but Zara was already heading for the livery, Toby at her heels. Most of the horses had been freed when the fire started, and they found their mounts tethered to a hitching post several buildings away, along with Zachary's bay. He went on foot, Toby realized. He'll need his horse, Zara said, untying all 3 animals. And we're going to bring it to him. They mounted quickly and set off for the ranch, riding hard through the night. The moon was bright enough to light their way, and they knew every inch of the trail. As they approached the ranch, Zara slowed their pace, alert for any sign of Wilkes or Zachary. The ranch house was dark and still, showing no evidence of disturbance. Zara felt a flicker of hope that perhaps Wilkes hadn't arrived yet. But as they drew closer, a movement near the barn caught her eye, 2 men wrestling on the ground. One was Zachary, his hat gone and his coat torn. The other was Frank Wilkes, a knife glinting in his hand as he tried to bring it down toward Zachary's throat. Without hesitation, Zara drew her revolver and fired a warning shot into the air. Both men froze, then looked in her direction. "Get off him, Wilkes," she ordered, training the gun on the man. Now, Wilkes' face contorted with rage. "You stupid woman, do you know what you've cost me? Millions. The railroad would have made me rich, not on my land," Zara replied steadily. "Now drop the knife." For a moment, she thought he would comply. Then, with a roar of fury, he lunged back toward Zachary, knife raised high. Zara didn't hesitate. She fired, the bullet striking Wilkes in the shoulder. He howled in pain, dropping the knife and clutching at the wound as blood began to soak his shirt. "You'll get blood everywhere," Zachary said. Shoving the injured man off him and getting to his feet, Zara dismounted, keeping her gun trained on Wilkes. "Then it'll match the dirt you came from," she replied coldly. Toby rode forward, leading Zachary's horse. "The sheriff's busy with the fire, but Robert went to fetch him," he reported. "Should be here soon." Zachary retrieved a length of rope from his saddle and bound Wilkes' hands, ignoring the man's curses and threats. The strongbox lay nearby, its contents scattered across the dirt. Zachary began collecting the papers and jewelry while Zara kept watch over their prisoner. "It's over, Wilkes," she told him. "The judge has confessed. The evidence is safe. You've lost." "It's never over," Wilkes spat, his face pale from pain and fury. "You think you've won. There are others like me. Men with vision, with power. Your little ranch won't survive the changes coming to Texas." "Maybe not," Zachary said, securing the last of the scattered items in the strongbox. "But it won't be your concern from a prison cell." Within the hour, Sheriff Graham arrived with several deputies. Wilkes was taken into custody, still protesting his innocence despite the overwhelming evidence against him. The sheriff promised to send the circuit judge as soon as possible to hear the case, though he had little doubt about the outcome. "You've done this town a service," he told Zachary and the Suttons as his men loaded Wilkes onto a wagon. "Exposed corruption that might have gone unchecked for years." "Just protecting what's ours," Zara said, watching as the wagon bearing Wilkes rolled away into the night. The sheriff tipped his hat. "Well, I'd say you've earned some peace. Don't think you'll have any more trouble from Judge Reynolds or anyone else connected to this business." After the sheriff left, a strange quiet settled over the ranch. The adrenaline of the past few days began to ebb, leaving Zara feeling both exhausted and oddly light, as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Toby, yawning widely, excused himself to bed, tactfully leaving Zara and Zachary alone on the porch. For several minutes they sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars. "Thank you," Zara finally said, "for everything." Zachary turned to look at her, his face soft in the moonlight. "I told you I'd come back." "You did," she smiled. "A man of your word. I try to be." He hesitated, then reached for her hand, his fingers entwining with hers. "Before we were interrupted at the boarding house, we were discussing reasons to stay in Sonora." Zara's heart quickened. "Were we?" "I recall you asking if there was a reason to stay, and you never answered." She met his gaze directly. "I think you know the answer, Zachary Galloway," he smiled, a true smile that transformed his serious face. I'd still like to hear it. Zara leaned closer, her free hand coming up to touch his cheek. Stay, she whispered. Stay with us, with me. His answer was a kiss, deep and sure, full of promise and possibility. When they broke apart, he kept his arms around her, as if unwilling to let go now that he had found her. I need to finish my report to the governor, he said against her hair. But after that, I was thinking of looking at that parcel of land adjacent to yours. The Anderson place. Old man Anderson's children are selling, and it's good grazing land. Zara pulled back slightly to look at him. You're serious about staying, about buying land here? Very serious, he confirmed. About the land and about the woman whose ranch it borders. His eyes searched hers. If that's what she wants. It is, Zara said, her voice clear and certain. It's exactly what she wants. In the days that followed, life at the Sutton Ranch settled into a new rhythm. Zachary sent his report to the governor, then traveled to San Antonio to testify against Judge Reynolds. When he returned, he brought news that the judge had been removed from office and would likely face prison time, along with Frank Wilkes. He also brought papers confirming his purchase of the Anderson property, 300 acres adjoining the Sutton Ranch. Together, they would have one of the most viable cattle operations in the county, with ample water and good grazing land. One evening, as summer gave way to fall, Zara found Zachary on the porch, looking out over their combined properties. The setting sun painted the landscape in hues of gold and amber, the promise of prosperity stretching out before them. Penny for your thoughts, she said, coming to stand beside him. He smiled, drawing her close. Just thinking that for a drifter, I've found a fine place to put down roots. And for a stubborn woman determined to make it on her own, I've found a fine partner, she returned, leaning into his embrace. Partner? He questioned, raising an eyebrow. Is that all? Zara laughed. For now, unless you have another proposal in mind. Zachary turned to face her fully, his expression suddenly serious. As a matter of fact, I do. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. I was going to wait for the right moment, but I'm learning that with you, Zara Sutton, every moment feels right. He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band set with a small but perfect diamond. It was my mother's, he explained. The one thing I kept all these years, waiting for the right person to give it to. Zara's breath caught in her throat. Zachary. I love you, Zara, he said simply. I think I started falling the moment you stood up to Wilkes in the street, gun in hand, defending what was yours. I want to build a life with you, raise cattle and maybe children, grow old watching the seasons change over land that belongs to both of us. He took the ring from its box. Will you marry me? Tears of joy sprang to Zara's eyes. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I will marry you, Zachary Galloway. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then sealed the promise with a kiss that spoke of all the years to come. From the doorway, Toby watched with a smile. About time, he said loudly, causing them to break apart. I was beginning to think I'd have to draw you a map, Mr. Galloway. Zachary laughed, keeping one arm around Zara. Your sister's a complicated woman, Toby. Had to make sure I was up to the challenge. And are you? Zara teased, leaning into his side. I'm certainly willing to spend a lifetime finding out. His eyes grew serious again. That is, if your brother approves. This is his home, too. Toby pretended to consider, then broke into a grin. Well, I suppose we could use another hand around the place. And Zara's been smiling more since you came than in the last year combined. He extended his hand. Welcome to the family, Zachary. They were married that November in a simple ceremony at the Sonora church. Mrs. Abernathy cried. Sheriff Graham gave the bride away, and Toby stood proudly as his sister's only attendant. The newly combined Galloway-Sutton Ranch quickly became known as one of the most successful in the county, especially after the railroad did indeed come through north of Sonora the following year. Zachary's experience as a ranger proved invaluable in dealing with the occasional rustler or troublemaker, while Zara's knowledge of the land and its seasons guided their agricultural decisions. Together, they created a legacy that would endure long after them. And when their first child was born, a son they named Jacob. After Zara's father, the family circle was complete. As Zara watched Zachary cradling their newborn son on the porch of the home they'd built together, She couldn't help but marvel at how life's most unexpected turns often led to its greatest blessings. "What are you thinking?" Zachary asked, noticing her gaze. Zara smiled, coming to sit beside them. "About beginnings, about how a confrontation in the street led to all this." She gestured to their home, the thriving ranch, their child. "About how sometimes the most unlikely meetings can change the course of a life." Zachary looked down at their son, then back at his wife. "Not change," he corrected gently. Reveal what was always meant to be." As the Texas sun set on another day, painting the land in hues of red and gold, Zara Sutton Galloway knew with absolute certainty that she had found her true home not just in the land she'd fought so hard to keep, but in the family she and Zachary had created together. And in years to come, when their grandchildren asked how they met, Zara would always begin the story the same way. "It was 1875, and your grandfather said I'd get blood everywhere. I told him it would match the dirt he came from.